He's retired from the NYPD. He spent 30 years on the job, part of which he spent time in Afghanistan searching for and rescuing a New York Times reporter that had been kidnapped. He also investigated and stopped a school shooting that had a strange twist. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. In the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we are joined by special guests talking about their experiences, their realities of investigating crimes, plus those who have experienced horrendous trauma. Police, first responders, military, and victims of crime share their stories. Hi, I'm John J. Wiley. In addition to being a broadcaster, I'm also a retired police sergeant. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com, and also like us on Facebook. Search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is brought to you in part by Colonial Metals Group. You can set up a safe and secure self-directed IRA where you can have access to your assets no matter what. Protect your future with gold and silver. Call Paul and his staff at Colonial Metals Group to learn how to get started. Call 800-898-1841. 800-898-1841. That's 800-898-1841, or go online to colonialmetalsgroup.com/LET Radio. Content is from New York State. We have Thomas Smith on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Thomas is a retired NYPD. 30 years on the job. 30. I already gave him a hard time about it. I was like, are you not? He had a great job. But part of his job, he wound up being assigned on the ground in Afghanistan, which we'll talk about. He interrupted and arrested a school shooter. There's a really strange twist with that. And he is a podcaster. The name of his show is The Gold Shield Show. Just go to thegoldshieldshow.com. You'll find it right there. Thomas, thanks so much for being a guest on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, and thanks for your service. Both very much appreciated.
Thank you so much, John, for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor.
And I got to get this out of the way. 30 years on the job. I know you weren't running for Saint of the Year, so what possessed you to do that?
You know, I figured 30 was a nice round number.
It is a round number.
Kicked the tires a little bit to see if I liked it. But you know what? It was, and the reason for that is you hear this a lot, but I love the job. Yeah. I grew up as a son of a retired NYPD detective, so that was all I ever wanted to do, and I loved being there. And, you know, I didn't plan on 30 when I started. 20 was the magic number, of course, back then. But then found myself doing what I was doing and where I was doing it around the world and really enjoyed it. And then all of a sudden you look up one day and it's 30 years, and that was a good time to call it a day. I was still healthy, still all my parts on me, so it was time to go.
And I'm thanking you for your service. It's a really long time. Now, I know the answer to this, but a lot of people don't. What is the Gold Shield, and what is the meaning and significance behind that?
Well, the Gold Shield is very significant in the NYPD. It's a detective shield. But when you just say, and everyone knows what it is you just say Gold Shield, they know what it is. It's an NYPD detective shield, and it is a treasured shield for those who have the lineage of it, like me. I grew up taking my dad's shield and putting it on my belt and running around and chasing my sisters around because that's what I wanted to do. So I always wanted it. That was my one goal in the police department when I started my career, and thankfully got to do it. And I got to do it with my dad's shield number, which made it even better.
That's amazing. And I got to clarify something just so people know. In New York, they use different terminology. In Baltimore, we called them badges. And our detectives had the same color badge as the police officers on the street. As a matter of fact, it wasn't even a different rank. It was a different job assignment. With the NYPD, a detective was a different rank than a police officer, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was a promotion, and then within the rank of detective, you had different grades. You had 3, 2, and 1. And here's how special it is, John. When you got promoted in the NYPD, you would say, hey, I'm getting promoted to sergeant. I'm getting promoted to lieutenant. All you would say when you got promoted to detective was, I was getting my shield. And everyone knew exactly what you meant by that.
So the funny thing is, and when I say funny, it's not ha-ha funny, but it is ironic, is you use the term collar. We use the term arrest. You use certain terms that we don't use, and it's the same job, same risks, same hazards, and the same, I should say, negative benefits. There's a lot of positive. I love being a police. I loved it. I retired the rank of sergeant, but I got hurt and retired young in an act of violence, and my career is over at 33. So I didn't get to do 30 years. I thought I'd do 25. and I wanted to make rank. And I thought, man, how you can make a difference is by making rank. And I made it to sergeant, and then my career is over. So it was a big adjustment for me after that career was over.
Yeah, the adjustment afterwards is rough. You know, someone asked me once before about it, and I said, you know, pretend walking straight ahead for 30 years, and it's someone telling you have to walk backwards. You know, it's going to be hard at first, and you're going to stumble, but you'll eventually get it. And that's what retirement is after spending more than half of your life in the police department. You know, it's realizing that it was over, and if you got out healthy and you got out with a fortunate and good career, which I did, you know, you look back and you're thankful for getting out in one piece and everyone being okay, and you look for your next level in life and your next job in life.
How long ago did you retire?
In 2020.
So you're a rookie at this retirement thing.
Yes, I am.
I got retired in 92.
I actually retired a week before the world went completely haywire, so the timing couldn't have been even better.
Well, in your career, and I think it's safe to say, I loved being police, and I get the distinct impression you did too, because you don't do 30 years unless you really love the job.
Right.
And
right.
the other thing
Absolutely
is,
right.
There's so many people say, oh, yeah, it's a power trip, and it's look, I did the job. I never felt powerful. Did you feel like you had a great deal of power you could wield whenever you wanted?
No, in fact, it was more fun than anything, and some people will kind of hear this a little weird, but you know, when you look forward to something your whole life and you end up doing it, you want it to be enjoyable. You know, so I just made the job fun and everything we had to do and focused. And, you know, my dad had told me when I graduated the academy to, you know, if you're going to do this job, do it great. You know, whether you're answering a phone or doing a homicide case, just do it great and enjoy what you're doing. And that's what I did. Every day I was working.
And the last question before we get into your story. You said it was a bit of adjustment afterwards. And a lot of people will misconstrue that. They would think, and I don't know about New York. I've had many guests on from New York, but they tend to think that policing's all like the Prince of the City and Serpico and whatever the one with Stallone was in the other side of New Jersey, Cop City, I think it was. They seem to think Copland. They seem to think that everybody in the job is like that. I didn't run into anybody like that in my career.
No, I mean, I ran into an unfortunate, you know, situation, not me personally, but, you know, I worked in the 30th precinct in the west side of Harlem when they had the largest corruption scandal in the NYPD. That was actually my command. So I did get a taste of the bad part of what policing can be, you know, but they got rid of the bad guys who needed to, you know, be dealt with in the way they were. And the good cops, you know, were applauded for being good cops in such a, you know, stressful spot, you know, surrounded by corruption. And, you know, we did it right. We did the right thing and were looked upon as the good guys during that time. So I did have kind of a taste of that. But after that, none at all. Not at all.
And when I was a kid, and my family immigrated from Ireland, they settled in New York, Long Island, North Jersey, and we go up there routinely to visit relatives when I was very young. But back then in the 70s, you didn't go to Times Square and you didn't go in a subway at night. Do you ever feel like it's returning back to the bad old days?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the sad part. And, you know, going back in my career, when I got on in 1990, the city was like that. You didn't go to a Broadway show. You didn't go to Central Park. You didn't certainly go to Times Square. And then in 94, when the administration changed and Giuliani got in there and Bill Bratton and Louis Adamone and John Timoney and allowed the cops to be cops again and make arrests and clean the city up, along with having the district attorney's offices on board with keeping the bad guys in jail, we were part of that enormous turnaround from 2,800 homicides a year, you know, drastically dropping every year after that. So all the hard work we did from 94 on that we literally broke our butt doing, you know, and what we had to go through to clean the city up. And then you turn around and you see all that hard work kind of just thrown in the basket.
We're going to take a short break. We're talking with Thomas Smith. He's retired NYPD, and I got a lot of great stuff anyway. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Colonial Metals Group has helped me create a self-directed IRA where I can have direct access to my assets. Let the team of experts, Paul and his staff at Colonial Metals Group, help you protect your family's future, giving you great information for free. Their level of professionalism and ability to listen make it easy for you to learn everything you need to know about preserving all you work for. Call Paul and his staff at Colonial Metals Group, 800-898-1841, 800-898-1841. That's 800-898-1841, or go online to colonialmetalsgroup.com/LET radio. Remember, let Paul and his staff at Colonial Metals Group give you more information.
I start my day a couple of times a week with the Breakfast with Champions rooms, which are free, and on the Clubhouse app, which is also free. I get motivation, guidance, and inspiration for my personal and professional life. Plus, I get to interact and even ask questions from celebrities, all in the Breakfast with Champions rooms in the Clubhouse app. The app and Breakfast with Champions is free. Download the app today, and I will see you in the Breakfast with Champions rooms on the Clubhouse app.
Return our conversation on the Law Enforcement Talk radio show with Thomas Smith, retired NYPD, 30 years on the job, retired as a detective, which we'll talk about in a few moments. He, during his career, wound up being assigned to Afghanistan on the ground to recover and find a New York Times reporter that had been kidnapped. And also, a very ironic story, stopping a school shooting, which we'll talk about in a few moments. He's one of the hosts of the Gold Shield podcast. Our website's thegoldshield.com. Tom, again, thanks for being a guest on the show. Thanks for talking about these things. But one of the things that a lot of people don't understand is I was detailed at DEA for almost 2 years as a U.S. Marshal, was going to D.C. and other parts of Maryland and down to Miami, Florida, and all this other stuff. But we don't think of police as being in other countries. And yet, in particular from the NYPD, there were a lot in Iraq and Afghanistan. You found yourself in Afghanistan, didn't you?
Yes, I did. After 9/11, I was assigned to the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, where I actually spent the last 17 years of my career. And during that, depending on what case you're working on, enables you to go around the world to work that investigation with other countries and other security services throughout the world, which was a great experience and something I treasure because the normal, everyday working groups in the NYPD, you don't tend to do that. So in task forces like JTTF and, like you said, DETF and DEA, you get to do that. And I found myself in November of 2008 assigned a kidnapping case of a New York Times reporter that was taken in Afghanistan while he was there to do a story. You get the call, and you look for that big case in your career of your boss calling you into your office and saying, hey, this one's yours, and that's exactly what happened with this. So myself and my partner were assigned the case, which we had to do both here and in Afghanistan. So at first, I took care of everything that had to take place in the United States and getting a whole bunch of different agencies together to work this case. The CIA, NSA, the military, a whole host of other agencies had to be on board with this case because it was becoming political. It was a big deal that it was from the New York Times. So you can imagine the microscope we were under with getting the information and trying to get this individual out. So I took care of everything here. But then a couple of months later, in March of 2009, I took off and went to Afghanistan because we needed someone on the ground there to start running the leads down and try to make some headway into locating him. And while I was there, I came up with the idea that I needed a high-level source to help me who knew the area, who knew the country, who might even know the bad guys. So I ended up developing, along with the CIA, a highly placed source that happened to be the largest heroin dealer in Afghanistan, became my source.
Wow.
And we got along very well because I had an agreement with him and he understood how things worked. I told him, I am not here for you. I don't care what you do. I don't care about your drug trade. I need you to help me get this guy out. And he respected that and understood that, and he believed me. And I was being truthful. I didn't care what he did. I needed him for a particular reason, and the reason was to find this American and get him home. And through him, we were able to get a number of proof of life videos and more of somewhat of a location of where it was. And we were working very close with one of the Navy SEAL teams from Bagram and the agency and a number of other agencies. And thankfully, with all the hard work we did and what we put into it, we were able to get him home sometime later. And that was a big part, a big successful part of my career to actually do that.
That's a huge thing. I got to ask
I was
this.
the only one. I was the only one to do that. I was the only NYPD to do that.
And I imagine that being Afghanistan is a total departure from what you're used to street policing in New York City.
Oh, it was totally different. I'm a New York City detective. I'm not in the military, and I'm getting dropped into the middle of a war zone. So I had to not only physically be ready, but mentally ready for that. And, because in the NYPD, like you down in Baltimore, you get your gun, you get your shield, you get a bulletproof vest. Over there, I'm carrying an M4, 2 9s, a heavy vest, a helmet, armor-plated cars, and all that. So, you had to be, mentally ready that we were in a war zone, and I had to prepare myself for that. And physically, I knew I'd be fine. My tactics and my physical, well-being was okay. The mental part of A, being in a war zone, and C, saying goodbye to my family. And not going to the Bronx or Brooklyn. I'm going to Afghanistan. So that was a little bit, to get by, but I knew everything was okay at home, so that relieved that part of my, thought process.
For, I think since I've been doing a show since 2017, I've had a handful of police on that were in the military, and they talked about deployments in combat zones and all that. And I had a far fewer, I'd say probably 2 fingers, you make number 3, that were assigned to different countries in war zones for different police tasks. And, a lot of ways, I can only imagine it's a totally different mindset than what you have working the streets of New York City.
Oh, it was, because A, you didn't have a day off. There were no days off. You worked 15 hours a day, running around trying to, put a puzzle together in a foreign country and making sure you drove in the right locations, you drove with teams, you didn't separate from each other. You were in a military mindset, still being a detective. You had to place yourself in a complete military zone of what you were doing tactically, physically, and mentally. And, at the end of the night, sometimes you were tired because you had to be completely on point, with what you were doing. For instance, one of the things in Afghanistan, and you might have heard this, is when you're driving around, you don't stop your car.
Right.
No matter what's in front of you, you're pushing cars out of the way up on sidewalks to get through a traffic circle because you were so vulnerable sitting still. So you never stopped your car. So you had to get in that mindset of never stopping. And if you were the passenger in a car, it was your responsibility to look at everything you were approaching, people around your car, people walking on the street, cars that were parked. It was a lot to do. It wasn't just a ride down to the corner. A lot went into just one car ride somewhere.
One of the things, there's actually a lot of things that will stand out. We'll return the conversation, we'll cover. But one of the things that really stood out to me, and I'm going to go way back in the conversation. On TV, we always see, come in my office and you get called in the boss's office. It's usually, what did I do? Did I do something wrong? Am I in trouble? How was that for you when you got called and you're like, you're going to Afghanistan?
Yep. You know what? It wasn't bad because I, at the time, was running another very large-scale investigation that was, somewhat around the world as well. And when the supervising special agent of my team called me into his office, and we had a great relationship. He was a great guy, and we talked all the time. So when he called me into his office, I actually thought it was going to be a conversation about my case. So I walked in his office, sat on his couch, kind of put my arm on the back of the couch, was like, hey, what's up? And then he laid this on me and went, oh, okay.
By the way, when we return, we're going to talk about how you have that conversation when you get home. We're talking with Tom Smith on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back.
How do you start your day? After grabbing a cup of coffee, I grab my phone and open the Clubhouse social audio app and go right to the Breakfast with Champions rooms. I get what I need to start my day the right way in the Breakfast with Champions rooms on the Clubhouse social audio app. Best of all, the Clubhouse social audio app is free, and so are the Breakfast with Champions rooms. So download the Clubhouse social audio app and join me in the Breakfast with Champions rooms.
I believe in having a substantial percentage of my financial future secured with gold and silver. Contact Paul and his staff at Colonial Metals Group to learn how to protect your financial future at Colonial Metals Group. You can set up a safe and secure self-directed IRA where you can access your funds, your assets, no matter what. Call 800-898-1841, 800-898-1841. That's 800-898-1841, or go online at colonialmetalsgroup.com/LET Radio. Return our conversation on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Special guest Tom Smith. He's a retired NYPD, 30 years on a job. He was in Afghanistan to find and recover a New York Times reporter that had been kidnapped. He was assigned to the FBI task force and worked with them and got sent to Afghanistan. We're also going to talk about an amazing apprehension he did with a school shooter that had a lot of twists and turns. He's one of the hosts of the Gold Shield podcast. Their website's thegoldshield.com. Thomas, before we went to break, we started alluding to the conversation, and the best way I can put it is I was married at the time, and then I found out I had to go to Miami, and I told my wife, I'm flying to Miami, I got to pack my bags, I'll probably be gone like 5 days, I'll be back. It was not she was not happy about it, but how do you go home and tell I'm assuming you're married at the time and had children. Yes. How do you tell your spouse that, oh, by the way, I have to go to Afghanistan, I don't know when I'll be back?
Well, here's the interesting part about it. Because of, I had traveled a lot before then. So my wife was kind of used to me, leaving and going away, but for 3 or 4 days, maybe a week, maybe 7 or 8 days, stuff like that. So when this came up and I had to explain to her that I was going to be in Afghanistan for 3 months. But here's the interesting part. Because of the security levels and secret levels of this case, I could not tell her why.
Oh.
All she knew was I was going into a war zone in Afghanistan for 3 months, and that was it. That's all she knew. She didn't even know why I was going.
Did you get the frosty response at all?
I got the, kind of really, is it, what it is, is it that important? I'm like, yes, it's life or death. It's, it's a big deal. It's not just going to check something out. And she got it,
Right.
My wife and I have been together for 34 years, and we were together before I got on the job. So she knew full well what this job entailed. And, to go to somewhere like that, she knew what the importance of it.
My dad was career Navy. He's since passed away many, many years ago. But he always worked. We had security clearances. And this is back in the old days, in the 70s. He would be assigned a ship. He'd go to the med cruise, and we wouldn't know when he'd come back. We get a phone call like 2 or 3 days before. Oh, by the way, we'll be here on this date. And I have to go to Spain. I have to go here. I have to go. Or sometimes he wouldn't even say where he's going. He just had to pack a bag, and he wasn't allowed to tell anybody anything. And he didn't tell us, the kids. He didn't tell mom. He didn't tell anybody.
Yeah, I mean, that's how it was. Even the trips I would take within the country, depending on the case I was working on, she never knew why I was going anywhere. She just knew it was part of the job. And my kids, my oldest one would ask a little bit because she, would realize what it was. The other two were a little younger and knew I was gone, but didn't know the wheres and whys of that happening. And my wife would take that on. And, thankfully, my wife is super strong and understood the job and took care of the kids while I was gone on top of her full-time job. So together, we took care of what we needed to take care of. And, that's how you last for 34 years.
Right. Well, look, a lot of people in police marriages don't. They don't make it that long. So my hat's off to you, but really off to her. And when I say this, I say with the utmost complimentary mindset. We serve, and people say, thank you for your service. I'm like, dude, if you only knew what my wife went through. If you only knew what my daughters went through. If you only knew, I didn't know. I never thought about how much my mother worried about me until I retired, and she told me. I was shocked at when you serve, you don't serve by yourself. The whole family supports you.
Oh, no doubt about it. And, again, growing up in it, my mom, had my dad in the 50s, 60s, and 70s being married during all those times. And then I go into the police department in the 90s when the city was still out of control. So for all those years before they both, passed away, they lived with the fear of me being out there and my dad being out there for, 50 years, 60 years combined. So, my mom, my sisters, my wife, it is a group effort, because if I was away and something was going on, they would all talk to each other. How you doing? Everything okay? My sisters would call my wife often, to make sure she was all right if they knew I was away. So you're not lying. It is a group effort to get through this job sometimes.
And one of the things that, and then we'll go into some of your back home policing, but one of the things that I never really believed in until fairly recently was this whole concept of generational trauma. And I knew the effect that policing had on me, and it wasn't all positive, and it's not all negative either. I don't want people to misunderstand me. There's a lot of good and bad, more good than bad. But I didn't understand the impact it had on my daughters, because they were very young when I retired, until they started telling me, and they still are impacted by it. Have you found that to be the case with you and your family?
Yeah, you know what? It was interesting. My middle girl, when I left to go to Afghanistan, was just turned 9, and she took it the hardest when I went away, because she knew I was going to be away for a long time. And then when I got home, she kind of became my travel agent. I had to run through her where I was going, how long I was going away for, whenever I was booking a trip to go away for work. She had to be my first point of contact in telling her where I was and what I was doing, and it made her feel better.
Yeah.
So that was fine to do, because it made her feel better that I was the one telling her, and she just wasn't waking up one day and I wasn't home. So, it makes an impact. Children realize things more than people give them credit for, and mine did as well.
And how is she doing today? How are your kids today?
Oh, they're great. They're thankfully very successful, finishing up their master's programs, starting their careers. Very, very well. I'm very blessed. And
have they broken the chain and them going into policing?
My son is going to. Don't want to say where he's going, but he'll start that whole process in the fall. He's going to graduate college early, so he'll start his processing for where he's going to end up in the fall. So I am very proud of him.
Yeah.
But I'll don't jinx anything and wait till everything is done and he's off and running.
The only really piece of advice I give to people that say they're going into policing, and I encourage them, is a great career. It's a great job. We can do a lot of awesome things for a lot of people. But one of the things I do say is, you go to a dentist every year, you get a checkup. You go to a general physician every year, you get a checkup, and you're proactive about these things. And I tell them, find someone that is a therapist, a social worker, a psychologist, whatever it is, that is trauma-informed and trauma-trained, and get in there once a year on your own and be proactive. Don't make the department send you. And because you got to be proactive and take care of your own mental health. You're going to have an impact. And you can lessen that by being proactive.
Oh, no doubt about it. People don't realize what the mental aspect of this job is, how much gets kept in your brain, how much you hold on to, and how much, how important it is to talk it out. Because, what's going on in the country today with the suicide rate completely through the roof again, has to be stopped. And thankfully today, there's so many more avenues and organizations that are out there to assist law enforcement and the military than there used to be. And we implored on our show all the time and other shows that we do, and yours, John, to just talk to someone, find a group, have a conversation. Don't keep it in, because keeping it in
is the worst
leads
thing.
to that one point of it just overflowing, and then then you can't stop it.
And the unfortunate part about policing is we get used to being around handguns, and sometimes people make spur of the moment decisions that have lasting impacts for short-term problems and things that could be easily handled. They just give up. And we're not going to beat that horse. It's something that's been going on since before I came a job, and we've all got to get better at doing that. We're talking with Thomas Smith. Thomas is a retired NYPD officer, 30 years on the job, retired as a detective. He is one of the hosts of the Gold Shield podcast, which we'll talk about in a moment. The website is goldshield.com, thegoldshield.com. We return, stopping a school shooting, which had some very, very interesting and disturbing aspects. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. One of the questions I get all the time is, how can I show my support for law enforcement? We're all busy. We've got busy lives, but there's something oh so simple you can do with our Facebook page. Search for Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page. And when you see a post you agree with that resonates with you, share it, especially episodes of the podcast. To do all that, just search for us on Facebook, look for Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, and be sure to click like. Return our conversation with Tom Smith on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Tom is a retired NYPD detective, 30 years on the job. He is a podcaster, amongst many other things. The name of his show, the co-host of his show, is The Gold Shield Show, or The Gold Shield Podcast. His website is thegoldshieldshow.com. I realize I've been telling you the wrong name the entire time. It's thegoldshieldshow.com. We were talking about, Tom, your service being in Afghanistan, which blows my mind. But then you came back home and you resumed the normal, typical NYPD jobs that we could talk about. But you got involved in investigating a school shooting. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Right around 2011, I was actually assigned to one of the satellite offices in upstate New York, closer to my house, which was a great gift. You know, I didn't have to travel into the city anymore. So after all those years, my commute cut down drastically to one of the satellite offices. So while I was up here in 2018, I get a call from my partner one evening, that she got approached. She got a call from the local police department, which is my town's police department where I live, that they had some disturbing posts that were being sent out during a group chat. And one brave little girl started taking screenshots of some of the things that were being said by one individual. So I said, okay, let's get on this. Let me know what it is. So we got together. I actually left my house and went and drove over there and met her. And she started to tell me about the case that during a group chat one night, one individual started asking the what if questions. What if someone went into the high school and shot it up? What if somebody left a note in the bathroom that there was going to be a shooting? And the school in question was my local high school, which was all my kids attended, and two of my kids were still attending. So now I'm dealing with a threat of a shooting in a school that two of my kids are still in. I'm very good friends with the principal and a number of teachers that were there. So now I have to kind of split myself with don't be personal and be professional and stop this incident from happening. So my partner at the time had a bunch of great accounts, covert accounts, that we were able to get into his account, and he friended us and, the whole social media part. So we were able to then see more of his posts that he was putting out, and a number of disturbing posts about, shootings and him idolizing the two Columbine shooters, serial killers, a number of guns that he would take pictures of on social media and post them. So all of this just dramatically kept getting worse and kept getting worse. So obviously we opened the case immediately and started to watch his social media posts and get up on some of his online searches that he was doing. And some of those entailed, firearm distributors and Dick's Sporting Goods, and going into Dick's and asking about the worst round a shotgun could be used against a person, things like that. And like I said, once we got into him, it got worse and worse every day. And then we heard that he was in another state for a weekend. And during that time, he sent one more post out that said, "I need a gun." And that was enough for us. So we got the local DA involved, got a search warrant for his residence that we actually executed while he was on his way back from Delaware. And we planned that. That was strategically planned because we wanted to be there when he got home. So we got into the house. We talked to his dad. We had everything set. He pulled into the driveway. We got him out of the car, locked him up. And I have to say, John, one of the most satisfying arrests I made in 30 years, because this was legit. This was going to happen 6 days after we arrested him. We found a number of packets of research that he did on serial killers. He did research on the Boston bombing, all things like that. And then we found the diagram he drew of the classroom that he was going to commit this terrible crime in. And on the reverse side of that paper was the hit list of the 6 or 7 people he was going to kill and target during this attack, and which I knew every single one of those kids personally when I saw their names. So that made it even more satisfying that we were able to stop this. And, unfortunately, we don't get a chance to stop these beforehand and have an individual in custody. And we were able to do that. And it was, like I said, one of the most satisfying arrests I ever made.
Really, we don't hear stories about the successful interventions, the prevention where lives are saved. We just hear the negative stuff. We hear the things that draw the headlines. And I got to say this: I'm older. I'm older than you, but my mind didn't operate like that when I was in high school. I don't know when it shifted.
No, and none of us did. I mean, you never heard of things like this. Like I said, I think I was telling my kids, you went to the playground, you had a fight, and then you finished the fight and went and got pizza.
Right. And you want to be best friends afterwards. That's the way it was.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal. And we solved a lot of issues. And by the way, it wasn't all bad. A lot of those guys taught me how to behave. They taught me things like respect. You're going to respect someone's sister, or if they don't have a brother, you're going to respect them anyway. If you're out of line, you heard about it from them. It wasn't just a bully type situation. It was a lot of good stuff. I want to transition to you leaving or retiring from police work, retiring from the NYPD. When did you start the podcast, the Gold Shield podcast?
We started it a year and a half ago. My partner, Dan Murphy, who was actually my sergeant when I was on the job in the Bronx gang unit, and then again in the Joint Terrorism Task Force. And Dan and I were always friends. We were friends since 1999. So we came up with the idea a year and a half ago in December of, and the premise of it was to highlight great work of law enforcement and the military and stories that people don't hear.
Right.
Like you just said, John, you hear the bad stuff. You don't hear these incredibly heroic actions that take place by law enforcement and the military. And that's what we do. Our guests drive our show. And we've been so impressed and proud of the guests that we've had on, from NYPD detectives to Secret Service agents to SEAL Team 6 guys, to women who were the first woman on a SWAT team in a given department. On top of, we've also interviewed true crime authors who go out there and tell stories of these incredible crimes that take place and the investigations that took place, during these crimes. And we're just every week blown away over and over again by the guests we have and the stories we hear. And one of the things we do, and me and you had talked about this, we don't hear the whole story when we set the show up. We like being surprised. We like authentic emotions. And when we hear these stories, and, we keep doing it. And we're lucky to have, police officers who've been shot 8 times and live, stories like that, and 9/11 survivors. So it's a great It's a great show. We just have a great time doing it. And, you know, we don't have a script to the show. It's 3 people, 4 people sitting around having a conversation about something. And our guests love that part, and we like it because it just flows, and, you know, the conversation kind of takes over.
And the best place to get more information about the show and all you do would be the website. That is thegoldshieldshow.com. Is there any other way to get in touch with you?
Well, that's our best way. You know, you can contact us on that. We're on every audio podcast platform you can think of: Spotify, Apple, iHeart, all of them. We're actually on some we don't even know, which is always a fun surprise.
Right. There's so many
we find out
there.
we're on somewhere.
There's so many out there. Well, Tom, thanks for your service, number one. And be sure to tell your missus and the children, even though the adults, that I said thank you for all they did as well. And thanks for being guests on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Very much appreciated.
Thank you for having me. It was great. Thank you so much.
This was the podcast version of the nationally syndicated Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, and we are so glad that you decided to join us. Big thanks to our guests for telling their story on the show. 2 simple things you can do. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com. That's letradio.com. And be sure to follow us or like us on Facebook. Do a search on Facebook for Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. And be sure when you see a post that we put up that you like, that you resonate with, that gets your attention, be sure to share it with your friends. We'll be back in just a few days with another great episode of the show. See you then.